Most success stories begin with a lucky opportunity, a brilliant idea, or a life-changing moment. This one begins with dirty work boots, the smell of hot steel, and a little girl who never understood why people believed some dreams belonged only to men. This is not the story of someone who became famous overnight. It is the story of a young woman who spent years proving that skill has no gender, that determination is stronger than prejudice, and that sometimes the people who doubt you become the very reason you refuse to quit. Her name is Emma Carter. She wasn't born into a wealthy family. She didn't grow up with influential parents or expensive schools. She grew up in a quiet industrial town where almost everyone worked with their hands. Her father repaired heavy construction equipment, and her mother worked long shifts at a local hospital. Money was always enough to survive but never enough to feel comfortable. As a child, Emma loved visiting her father's workshop after school. While other children spent hours playing video games or watching television, she preferred walking between giant machines covered in grease and dust. She was fascinated by the sounds, the loud humming of grinders, the sparks flying through the air, the smell of freshly cut metal. To most people it looked like a noisy, dirty place. To Emma it looked like magic. Her father never forced her to come. In fact, he often told her she could stay home if she wanted. But every Friday afternoon she appeared at the workshop wearing old jeans and oversized safety glasses that almost covered half her face. She didn't complain about getting dirty. She asked questions. What does this machine do? Why did that pipe crack? How do you know where to weld? Sometimes her father laughed because she asked more questions than his apprentices. One evening, when Emma was only 12 years old, one of the mechanics jokingly handed her a welding helmet. "It weighs almost as much as you do," he laughed. Everyone expected her to put it down after a few seconds. Instead, she adjusted the helmet, looked through the dark glass and smiled. "I want to learn." The workshop became silent. One mechanic whispered to another, "She's just a kid." Another shook his head. "And she's a girl." Emma heard every word. She didn't answer. She simply watched her father strike an arc across two pieces of steel. Bright blue light filled the room. Molten metal slowly connected the pieces together. To everyone else it was ordinary work. To Emma it looked like creating something impossible. That evening, while driving home, she looked out the window and quietly said, "Dad, I think I want to become a welder." Her father didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the road for several seconds. Finally, he smiled. "If that's what you truly want, you'll have to work twice as hard as everyone else." She frowned. "Why?" "Because some people will decide you can't do it before they even meet you." Emma didn't fully understand those words. She would soon. At school, career day arrived during her final year. Students stood up one by one and talked about their future plans. "I want to become a lawyer, a teacher, a doctor, a software engineer." When Emma's turn came, she stood confidently. "I want to become a certified industrial welder." For a second, nobody reacted. Then someone laughed. Another student turned around. "A welder? Seriously?" One boy smiled sarcastically. "You know that's a man's job, right?" Another added, "You'll quit after the first week." Even the teacher looked surprised. "Emma, have you considered something a little less physically demanding?" She politely answered, "I have. And I don't want it." The classroom became quiet again. But after school, the whispers continued. People laughed in the hallways. Some called her stubborn. Others called her unrealistic. A few simply thought she was seeking attention. The hardest part wasn't hearing it once. It was hearing it every single day. After graduation, Emma enrolled in a technical college specializing in welding and metal fabrication. On the first morning, she walked into a classroom filled with 32 students. 31 were men. She was the only woman. Several students looked surprised. One quietly said, "She must be in the wrong room." Another laughed. "No chance she'll finish the semester." Emma pretended not to hear them. The instructors never treated her unfairly. They treated everyone exactly the same, which meant expectations were high, very high. The first weeks were exhausting. Students spent hours learning different welding techniques. MIG, TIG, stick welding, blueprint reading, metal preparation, safety procedures. precision measurements. Emma loved every lesson. But she also noticed something. Whenever a male student made a mistake, people said, "Don't worry. You'll get better." Whenever Emma made the same mistake, someone whispered, "I knew she couldn't do it." The standards weren't equal. She realized she wasn't only learning a profession, she was constantly being judged. Every successful weld had to prove she belonged there. Every small mistake became evidence that she didn't. That pressure could have broken her. Instead, it changed her routine. She arrived before everyone else. She stayed after classes ended. She practiced until her gloves were worn out. Sometimes security guards had to remind her the building was closing. She wasn't trying to become good. She was trying to become impossible to ignore. 16 months later, practical examinations began. Students had to complete complex welding tests under strict supervision. There would be no second chances. One mistake, one weak joint, one failed inspection, and the certification could be delayed for months. The atmosphere was tense. Some students looked nervous. Others tried to appear confident. Emma focused only on the metal in front of her. Hours passed. When the inspectors finished examining every project, they announced the results. Emma had achieved one of the highest scores in the entire class. The same students who once laughed now quietly congratulated her. Not because they suddenly supported her, because they could no longer deny her skill. She had earned their respect, or at least some of it. Emma believed the hardest part was finally over. She couldn't have been more wrong. Finding a job would become an even bigger battle. Emma graduated with excellent results, convinced that employers would finally judge her by her skills instead of her appearance. Reality had different plans. During the first month after graduation, she sent her resume to nearly every fabrication shop, shipyard, and industrial contractor within driving distance. Some companies never replied. Others invited her for interviews. Those interviews quickly began to sound the same. The managers rarely questioned her certifications. They questioned her. One interviewer looked at her resume, then looked at her. "You really completed all of these welding courses?" "Yes." "You passed the certification?" "Yes." He leaned back in his chair. "You understand this job is physically demanding?" "I do." "It's dirty." "I know." "It's dangerous." "I've been trained for it." The man nodded politely before saying the sentence she would hear again and again. "We're looking for someone with a better fit for this position." Emma walked back to her car feeling frustrated. She knew exactly what better fit meant. Another company was even more honest. The owner didn't waste time pretending. "You seem hardworking," he said. "But our clients aren't used to seeing women on construction sites." Emma remained calm. "So you're rejecting me because of the clients?" "I'm rejecting you because I don't want unnecessary problems." She thanked him for his time and left. Driving home, she gripped the steering wheel tighter than ever before. She wasn't angry because she had been rejected. She was angry because nobody cared how well she could weld. They only cared that she was a woman. 3 months later, a medium-sized steel fabrication company finally gave her a chance. Not because they believed in her, because they desperately needed workers. Her first day started at 6 in the morning. She arrived 20 minutes early. Several employees were already drinking coffee before the shift. The conversation stopped when she walked into the break room. Someone quietly muttered, "So it's true." Another smiled. They actually hired her. Emma introduced herself. Most nodded politely. A few didn't respond at all. The supervisor handed her protective equipment. "You'll work with Mike." Mike had been welding for almost 25 years. He wasn't rude. He simply didn't believe she belonged there. As they walked across the shop floor, he asked, "So, how long do you think you'll last?" Emma smiled. "I guess we'll find out." He laughed. "Most new guys quit within 6 months. I'm not most people." The first weeks were brutal. The work was harder than anything she had imagined. Heavy steel beams, long hours, constant heat, grinding dust everywhere. Her shoulders hurt. Her hands blistered. Her boots felt heavier every evening. But none of that was the hardest part. The hardest part was proving herself every single day. Whenever a difficult project appeared, someone else received it first. Whenever equipment needed to be moved, someone would say, Let us handle the heavy stuff. Whenever clients visited the workshop, people assumed Emma worked in the office. One customer walked directly past her. I'm looking for the welder. Emma answered. You're talking to her. The man laughed. No, I mean the actual welder. I am the actual welder. He stared for several seconds before awkwardly apologizing. Moments like that happen almost every week. One afternoon, the company received an urgent order. Several structural components needed to be repaired before sunrise. The deadline was impossible. Everyone stayed late. Around midnight, one of the senior welders accidentally ruined an important section. The damaged weld had to be removed completely. There wasn't enough time. People began arguing. The supervisor looked around the workshop. Finally, his eyes stopped on Emma. Can you fix it? Every conversation stopped. Some workers exchanged doubtful looks. Mike crossed his arms. This isn't practice anymore. Emma walked toward the damaged structure without saying a word. She inspected the joint carefully, measured it twice, prepared the surface, adjusted the machine. Then she lowered her helmet. The workshop became silent except for the sound of electricity. Blue light filled the room. Nobody spoke. 15 minutes later, she finished. The inspectors checked every measurement. One of them smiled. Perfect. The supervisor exhaled deeply. We can ship it. For the first time since Emma joined the company, nobody questioned whether she belonged there. Mike slowly walked over. He looked at the finished weld. Then at Emma. I've been doing this for 25 years. Emma waited. He nodded once. Nice work. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't dramatic. But from Mike it meant everything. As months passed, Emma earned more responsibility. She worked on larger projects. Factories, warehouse frames, agricultural equipment, industrial pipelines. Her confidence grew, but promotions never came. Whenever a team leader position became available, someone else received it, usually a man with less experience. Emma finally asked her manager why. He sighed before answering, You're one of our best welders. Then what's the problem? He hesitated. Some of the older clients expect a male supervisor. Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. So I'm good enough to do the work. But not good enough to lead it? The manager looked uncomfortable. I'm just trying to be realistic. Emma nodded slowly. So am I. That evening she drove home in complete silence. For years she had believed that if she worked harder than everyone else, eventually people would stop seeing her gender first. Instead, the better she became, the higher the invisible wall seemed to grow. A few weeks later, another opportunity slipped away. The company won a large industrial contract worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Emma had worked on the proposal for months. She knew every drawing, every measurement, every technical detail. Yet when the project began, the company hired an outside supervisor. During lunch, Emma overheard two executives talking. She's probably the best welder we've got. So why didn't we promote her? One of them shrugged. Our biggest clients are traditional. That sentence stayed in her mind all afternoon. Traditional. It sounded polite. But to Emma it meant one thing. Not yet. Maybe never. That evening, she stayed alone in the workshop after everyone had left. The machines were silent. The lights reflected off unfinished steel frames. She slowly walked between them. For years she had been building products that carried someone else's company name, someone else's reputation, someone else's success. She placed her hand on one of the finished structures. Then a question appeared in her mind, one she couldn't ignore anymore. What if I stopped waiting for someone to believe in me? What if I built something of my own? She didn't know how she would do it. She didn't have investors. She didn't have wealthy relatives. She didn't even have enough savings to rent a proper workshop. But for the first time in years, she stopped thinking about getting promoted. She started thinking about becoming her own boss. That night Emma couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the same question. How many more years am I going to wait for someone else to decide what I'm capable of? She had spent years proving herself. She had earned certifications. She had completed difficult projects. She had worked overtime without complaining. She had solved problems that others couldn't. Yet every important decision about her future was still being made by someone else. The next morning, she arrived at work earlier than usual. Everything looked the same machines, the same sparks, the same noise, but something inside her had changed. For the first time, she wasn't looking at the workshop as an employee. She was looking at it as a future competitor. Emma didn't quit immediately. She knew that passion alone couldn't pay rent. For almost a year, she continued working during the day while preparing for something bigger after work. Every paycheck had a purpose. She stopped buying unnecessary things. She canceled expensive subscriptions. She rarely went out on weekends. Friends invited her on vacations. She politely declined. "What are you saving for?" one friend asked. Emma smiled. "My freedom." Little by little, her savings account grew. Not quickly, but steadily. She also spent evenings studying business, taxes, insurance, customer contracts, equipment maintenance, pricing, marketing, accounting. She realized that running a company required much more than knowing how to weld. She had to learn everything else from scratch. Sometimes she finished studying after midnight and had to wake up again at 5 in the morning. It was exhausting. But unlike before, every hour felt like an investment in herself. After 11 months of planning, Emma finally made her decision. She walked into her manager's office carrying a single envelope. "I'd like to give my notice." The manager looked surprised. "You got another offer?" "No." "So where are you going?" "I'm starting my own fabrication business." For several seconds he didn't speak. Then he smiled politely. "Emma, that's a huge risk." "I know. Running a business is very different from welding." "I know. You'll need customers." "I know." He sighed. "I honestly hope it works." Emma appreciated his honesty. But as she walked through the workshop one last time, she overheard a familiar conversation. "She'll be back. Probably in 6 months. Starting a company isn't a hobby. Especially not in this industry." Emma didn't turn around. She had heard enough opinions for one lifetime. Her first workshop wasn't impressive. It was an old warehouse on the edge of town that had been empty for years. The roof leaked whenever it rained. The walls needed painting. The electrical system barely worked. There was no office, no receptionist, no employees, only one welding machine she had bought secondhand, a workbench, a toolbox, and a small coffee maker sitting on a wooden shelf. The first morning she unlocked the door, the building echoed with silence. She stood there alone. No coworkers, no supervisor, no guaranteed paycheck. Everything depended on her now. She took a deep breath. This is it. Finding customers proved even harder than finding a job. Emma visited construction companies, local farms, equipment repair businesses, manufacturing plants. She introduced herself dozens of times every week. Some meetings lasted less than 2 minutes. "We already have suppliers." Others ended with polite smiles. "We'll call you if we need anything." Most never called. One owner didn't even hide his doubts. "You own this company?" "Yes." "You're the welder?" "Yes." He laughed. "I thought you were here from the office." Emma smiled. "There is no office." Weeks passed. Bills continued arriving. Electricity, rent, insurance, equipment payments. But almost no money came in. Emma began wondering whether everyone had been right. One evening she sat alone inside the workshop, looking at her notebook. She calculated her finances 3 times. If nothing changed, she had enough savings for about 2 more months. That realization frightened her. Not because she feared hard work. She had never been afraid of hard work. She feared running out of time before people gave her a chance. Then on a rainy Tuesday morning her phone rang. A local farmer needed emergency repairs on a broken trailer. The company he normally used couldn't come for several days. Emma accepted immediately. She arrived within an hour. The repair itself wasn't complicated, but she treated it as if she were building a bridge. Every weld was clean, every measurement precise. Before leaving, she cleaned the entire work area without being asked. The farmer inspected the repair. "You finished already?" "Yes." He climbed onto the trailer, checked every joint, then smiled. "This is better than the original." Emma thanked him and packed her tools. As she drove away, she had no idea that this small repair would change everything. 3 days later, another farmer called. "I got your number from Daniel." The following week, 2 more customers called. Then a construction company. Then a metal supplier. Then a machinery repair shop. Emma never spent thousands on advertising. Her reputation became her marketing. People remembered 3 things. She arrived when she promised. She charged honestly. She never left unfinished work. Slowly, her calendar filled. For the first time since opening the workshop, she couldn't accept every job. She was simply too busy. About a year after starting the business, something unexpected happened. One of the companies that had rejected her years earlier contacted her. They needed custom steel components for a large project. Emma visited their office. The same manager who had once said clients wouldn't accept a female welder greeted her with a handshake. "We've heard good things about your company." Emma recognized him immediately. He didn't seem to recognize her. During the meeting, he asked, "So, how many welders work for you?" Emma smiled. "At the moment, just enough." He laughed. "I like that answer." Before leaving, he looked around her workshop. "I have to admit, you've built something impressive." Emma thanked him. She never mentioned the interview years earlier. She didn't need to. Her work had already answered every question he once asked. As new contracts continued arriving, Emma faced a different problem. She could no longer complete every project alone. 4 months she had worked 12 and sometimes 14 hours a day. It wasn't sustainable. One evening she looked around the busy workshop. Finished steel frames stood beside new orders waiting to begin. Her phone kept ringing. Emails kept arriving. She smiled to herself. For the first time in her career, being busy wasn't someone else's success. It was hers. She opened her laptop and created a new job advertisement. "Experienced welder needed." As she pressed publish, she realized something extraordinary. Years ago, people told her there was no place for a woman in this profession. Now, she was creating jobs in the very industry that once refused to believe in her. Emma still remembered her first day as a business owner. An empty warehouse. 1 welding machine. No employees. No guaranteed income. Now, 3 years later, the workshop looked completely different. The parking lot was full before 7 every morning. Delivery trucks came and went throughout the day. The sound of cutting machines mixed with the bright flashes of welding arcs. Orders covered the planning board inside the office. There were deadlines to meet, customers to call, materials to order, and new projects starting almost every week. Sometimes Emma walked through the workshop before everyone arrived. She would stop for a moment and simply listen. Years ago, silence had filled the building. Now it was alive. Not because of luck. Because of thousands of ordinary days filled with hard work. Hiring her first employee had been frightening. Hiring the second felt easier. By the end of the 3rd year, Emma employed 12 people. Some had decades of experience. Others were apprentices just beginning their careers. She never cared where someone came from. She cared how they worked. One morning, a young woman arrived for an interview. She looked nervous. "I almost didn't come," she admitted. "Why?" "I've been told this isn't the right career for women." Emma smiled. "I've heard that before." The applicant laughed. "My family thinks I'm making a mistake." Emma stood up and walked her through the workshop. "You see everyone working here?" The young woman nodded. "They're here because they earned their place." She paused. "That's the only rule that matters." The applicant accepted the job that same week. Months later, another woman joined the company. Then another. Soon, several women were working alongside experienced welders, fabricators, and machine operators. Nobody received special treatment. Nobody needed it. The standard was the same for everyone. Work hard. Keep learning. Respect your team. Do quality work. Emma also changed something she had always disliked about her previous jobs. She remembered supervisors who never listened. Managers who stayed inside comfortable offices while everyone else worked on the shop floor. She promised herself she would never become that kind of owner. Every morning she greeted every employee. She still wore protective gear. She still welded whenever the team needed another pair of hands. If a difficult deadline approached, she stayed late with everyone else. One afternoon, a new apprentice asked, "Why are you helping us? You're the owner." Emma smiled while adjusting her welding helmet. "The customer isn't paying for my title. They're paying for our work." Her employees respected her because she never asked them to do something she wasn't willing to do herself. As the business continued growing, larger companies started noticing Emma's work. One contract became two. Two became five. Soon her company was manufacturing custom steel structures for factories, warehouses, commercial buildings, and transportation companies across the region. People who had never heard her name before now recommended her business to others. Not because she had the biggest company, because clients trusted her. If Emma promised a deadline, she met it. If a mistake happened, she fixed it. If a project became more complicated than expected, she never disappeared. She answered the phone. She visited the site. She solved the problem. Her reputation became stronger than any advertisement money could buy. One afternoon, Emma received an invitation to speak at the same technical college where she had once been the only woman in her class. Walking back into that building felt surreal. The classrooms looked smaller than she remembered. The welding booths had been upgraded. The instructors recognized her immediately. One of them smiled. "I always knew you'd do well." Emma laughed. "You also knew it wouldn't be easy." He nodded. "I did." During the presentation, dozens of students listened carefully. At the end, one young man raised his hand. "What was the hardest part?" Emma thought for a moment. It wasn't learning to weld. It wasn't starting a business. It wasn't working long hours. The room became quiet. "The hardest part was ignoring people who had already decided who I was before they even knew my name." Several students wrote those words down. Then a young woman in the back asked, "Did people eventually stop saying this wasn't a job for women?" Emma smiled. "No. They just became fewer every year. And eventually, their opinions stopped mattering." A few months later, Emma attended a regional manufacturing conference. Business owners, engineers, suppliers, and contractors filled the exhibition hall. As she walked between the booths, someone called her name. She turned around. Standing in front of her was the manager who had once refused to hire her years earlier. He looked surprised. "I've been hearing about your company everywhere." Emma smiled politely. "It's been a busy few years." He hesitated before speaking again. I owe you an apology." Emma didn't interrupt him. "When you applied for a job with us, I judged you without giving you a real chance. I was wrong." There was no anger left inside her. Only perspective. She shook his hand. "We all make decisions we wish we could change." He smiled. "I suppose we do." As they walked away in different directions, Emma realized something. Winning had never been about proving him wrong. Winning had been about proving herself right. 10 years after opening her workshop, the company had grown far beyond anything Emma had imagined. More than 60 employees worked across production, engineering, logistics, and customer service. The small rented warehouse had become a modern manufacturing facility. Apprentices who once knew nothing about welding had become skilled professionals. Some had even started leading their own teams. Emma often stood on the balcony overlooking the workshop. Watching people work together reminded her why she had started everything. It had never been about becoming rich. Money allowed the business to grow, but purpose kept it alive. She wanted to build a workplace where people were respected for what they could do, not for how they looked, where they came from, or what others expected of them. Years earlier, people had looked at a young woman wearing a welding helmet and said, "You'll never make it." Now those words sounded almost unbelievable. Not because the world had changed overnight, but because one person had refused to let those words become her future. Emma's story wasn't about steel. It wasn't even about business. It was about choosing your own path when everyone else insists you should follow theirs. It was about showing up every day, especially when nobody believes in you. It was about understanding that success is rarely built in one extraordinary moment. It is built in thousands of ordinary days when quitting would have been easier. And perhaps the most important lesson of all was this: people will always have opinions about what you can or cannot do. Some will doubt you because of your age. Some because of your background. some because of your gender. You cannot control what they believe, but you can decide whether their opinion becomes your future. Emma chose not to. That decision changed her life. And years later, it gave hundreds of other people a place to build theirs.